Now we can talk to the man who's been crunching through all of the numbers. Our election analyst, Professor Michael Thrasher, is here with us. Now, of course, there's lots of caveats, right? Because people vote differently in locals and generals. But what do you make of the big reveal?
I think it's something that we've known for quite some time, but it is nice to see actual numbers here. We speculated quite early on that Labour had done well, but not well enough, because it has an enormous mountain to climb to win an overall majority of the next general election. Even so, this is a big swing. I mean, the Conservative vote is down substantially from the 45% that it got in 2019 to just 29% now. So that's a very sharp fall. A modest rise for Labour, but nevertheless a big swing, Conservative to Labour. But it's not enough to win an overall majority. So that we're in that intriguing position where the Conservatives easily lose their overall majority. The Conservatives lose so many seats that there's no coming back in terms of, you know, the discussion about who would form a minority government. It would be Labour. But again, 28 seats of an overall majority. So we're in that interesting territory of what happens after this. Do they go into a minority government? Do they try and form a coalition?
It was interesting, the first thing that you said, Sam, when you looked at that was like, oh, hang on, that means that Labour, along with the Lib Dems, that would be enough. They wouldn't need the SNP.
That's right. This is an enormous moment, and this underscores how this set of elections has been incredibly important, because it's crystallised a big change in the way that the British public are looking at politics. You can say, on the basis of the result, that it now looks incredibly unlikely, if the results are anything like this, that Rishi Sunak, Conservatives, will be in Downing Street after the next general election. But Labour doesn't, as Michael says, quite meet the threshold for an overall majority. In other words, there'll be a hung parliament under these results, under that projection that you can see on the screen behind you. But we are 28 seats short of a majority, which would give you a majority plus 2. But it is a good deal easier to work alongside the Liberal Democrats, who, after all, are a unionist party as well, than it would be the SNP. And if the Liberal Democrats are on 39, that gives you more than enough to take you over the 326 threshold. It would have been a lot more difficult for Keir Starmer had that result been less good for Labour and potentially he'd had to rely on the SNP as well to get him over the line. Now, I am sure that the Conservative Party will make absolute hay of the fact that the Labour Party don't go over that 326 line. There will be stories briefed every day between now and the election about the chaos of a potential minority or coalition, and is Keir Starmer strong enough and all the rest of it. Worth saying, of course, that, you know, Conservatives are in coalition with their own party, with various factions, various wings that have kind of pushed British politics in all sorts of ways in the last few years. But the Labour Party are going to have to answer questions about how they would deal with a hung parliament. But I think there will be a sigh of relief that if that is the question, they could probably do it with the help of the Liberal Democrats rather than needing nationalists in order to get there.
Just as we've been talking, seeing the Conservatives, they're losing at Canterbury to no overall control. Again, just really echoing the story that we've been seeing of Conservatives dropping seats, losing control of councils. Michael, it does feel to me like I know exactly what Labour would say if they looked at that. They'd be saying, look, this is not fair. We've been winning in loads of the places that we've been targeting that we need to in order to get to that majority. Others wouldn't have 75 seats in the House of Commons, plus you're not even taking into account what's happening in Scotland with the difficulties of the SNP. They are convinced they've got a path to a majority.
I think some of those remarks are valid, and we really don't know what is going to happen with the SNP Labour battleground at the next general election, because we don't actually know the impact on the SNP of recent events. But Labour cannot deny that for this set of local elections, they haven't been the only party that's advancing against the Conservatives. The Liberal Democrat gains, both in terms of seats and councils, is rather impressive. Their advance in terms of vote share is impressive, and they've tripled the number of MPs that they have. So, and again, as Sam says, the intriguing prospect is that they can do a deal with the Liberal Democrats, but, you know, it's not necessarily that their ideal position. So I agree that they can make the argument about the SNP, but, you know, it's a question. They cannot deny that the Lib Dems have had a good election, just as good as they've had.
Just a little bit of intel from the Labour Party, and I want to know what you make of it. We've been curious about just how many seats the Labour Party think they need to rely on from the SNP, turning Labour in order to give them an overall majority. And I've got a figure. The Labour Party, I understand, think that they could rely on conservatively just 12 to 15, so not a huge number of seats, but that means they need to do better in England. How credible is it for the Labour Party to say we can get an overall majority if they're only relying on 12 to 15 seats, swapping from SNP to Labour?
No Labour government has formed with fewer than 40 seats coming from Scotland. Even in their landslide, they had large numbers of seats from Scotland. It was the banker, wasn't it? They would start with a whole load of seats in Scotland, and then suddenly they've lost them, and they've been in opposition for a long time. I don't find that sort of thesis really credible in terms of such a small number coming from Scotland, because what we've seen across parts of the south of England is Liberal Democrats advancing, Labour advancing in some areas, but not across the board in the same way that Blair did in '95 and then on into the general election. And for every seat that it fails to make inroads in terms of southern England, it's got to find them somewhere, and it's got to be in Scotland.
Fascinating to talk to you both. Thank you very much for sharing the projections with us. And I think it really does underline the mountain that Labour do have to climb and the swing that they need to find in order to get a majority at the next election. That is difficult.